Hey there, Jay Ruane here. Welcome to another edition, the Tuesday edition of Maximum Growth Live. I like doing this with my fingers. I am Jay Ruane, the CEO of FirmFlex Social Media Marketing for Lawyers, as well as Ruane Attorneys, a civil rights and criminal defense practice in Connecticut. With me, as always, down there, DC, Maryland, Virginia, my good friend Seth Price of Blue Shark Digital, as well as Price Benowitz. Seth, what does Blue Shark Digital do?
It attempts to take law firms' web presence and make them saturated in the market so you can't help but know them.
I love that. I love that. So we are live today, and a it's a big day in American society and American culture. And the reason why it's a big day today is that it's possible that the American people might decide to terminate somebody's employment. And so that brought me to thinking about uh, letting people go in the context of my law practice. And then this past weekend, so last night, I'm sick of watching CNN. I wind up I wind up putting on some reruns of The Office, and it's actually the episode where Michael Scott goes to New York to interview for Jan's job, but he doesn't know he's interviewing for his girlfriend's job. And, I'm just thinking about the exit, leaving, because I've got this thing that I showed in the Associates Academy to the Maximum Lawyer Guild a couple of weeks ago that I stole, absolutely stole from William Eady, who's a phenomenal attorney, about this concept of stay in joy, leave in peace. But sometimes leaving peacefully is leaving peacefully for the firm, but it's not necessarily leaving peacefully for the employee. And I know you've been there. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about exiting an employee and when is the right time, because we've all seen it in the forums. And I know, we're part of Maximum Lawyer. And so in the Maximum Lawyer Facebook group, you always see the whole hire slow, fire fast. I know you've been in this situation before. Can we talk about it?
Look, it is the biggest, most difficult, complex question in the sense that I can't tell you, the firm's been around 12 years. I can't tell you how many times we've known it's time to move on and haven't quickly enough. Again, guilty. There are times when we know it. My law partner and I, Dave, we spend lots of time discussing what do you do in these situations. And look, we've been very fortunate. Most of our issues have not been with key employees. Most of our issues have been with the what we talk about, that 1 to 3 year lawyer person or the paralegal person in a developing practice where you don't quite know what you need yet. And the most frustrating thing is, academically, we both know if I put something up there, everybody's like, let them go, let them go. But we both know this is what the dirty secret is. What are you going to do on Monday when there's not somebody in that seat? Now, again, academically, are you better off doing it quickly? Yes. Do you find out worse stuff afterwards? Yes. But again, and when you go back, if I could have a DVR and go back to the decision making, how many times should I have done it more quickly? I'm sure many. But that is easier Monday morning quarterbacking when you're trying to figure out how to get the practice, from year zero. Now, for me, year 12, whatever it is, the fact is there are times when you're making the best of a bad decision. Now, look, if there's theft, if there's fraud, there are third rail things where you're like, okay, that person's out today. But this is the piece that it would be great to have an honest conversation about, which is here's the academic rule and what should be done. But are there instances where you do let something drag until you have somebody ready to take that over so that you're not left with a gaping hole that could cause problems on a bunch of different levels?
Yeah, and one of the things that's so challenging for us as entrepreneurial minded lawyers is that our practices really are an extension of ourselves. And you can have a million systems uh, in operation, but at the end of the day, when you sign those paychecks on the front and your name is on the door, you develop relationships with people that help you get to that point. And I like to, liken the analogy of a well-run law firm to a well-run sports franchise, right? And in those situations, you may draft a player for a year, a season, You may have a player that's going to be there for 20 seasons, or 5 or 10. But you have to understand that you need the people that you need to survive right now, and they may not be with you forever. The
Well,
I
that's one of our prior guests talked about it being a team, not a family. And
Right.
that when that member of the team, Finkelstein talks a lot about this, other people we've had on talk about this, and that, when you look at it that way, and I'll tell you that in recent months, I have gotten better. I'm taking more of the best practices advice about being proactive and letting somebody go. Historically, we would get to the point where we have so many things that we're doing in growth mode that there are times that somebody may remain. And once they leave, yeah, it was bad. And we found out bad stuff that had been going on along the way. But there's also when you do it the right way, where you do it on a Friday afternoon, you do it by the book, you consult with your employment lawyer. And I'm really excited to have a rock star employment lawyer. We can talk to about some of these issues this week. But that a couple Fridays ago, I'm sitting at a little league playoff game dealing with a meltdown going when my staff is letting somebody go, where it was the right thing to do. The person was not performing. And yet all of a sudden you have one of these, irate situations, which is now interpersonal. And you're worried about reviews for the firm. You're worried about all sorts of liability issues. And it's not as simple as, hey, in my estimation, one of the things that I'm really proud of was over the years, we strategically helped counsel people out the door when it wasn't right. That's the home run.
Sure.
And that when you're able to, I remember early on, we had somebody who hit a bunch of different categories that could have meant lawsuit had they wanted to come after us. And it was not working. They were terrible. And we were able to get a resignation, in front of a firing. Anytime you can do that, you don't have unemployment to deal with, you don't have an angry person. So that to me is the ideal. It doesn't always work, but let's say at least 1 out of 3 times, you could probably counsel somebody out with the right person doing that. That's one of the things that I loved in building the firm that eliminated a bunch of this. The question is, what happens when there is no insight? Somebody thinks they're God's gift to your firm, and yet it's not working and it needs to move on.
Well, and I live close to Fairfield, Connecticut. I drive by, go to my parents, the headquarters of GE, and Jack Welch had this very, famous every year fire the bottom 10% of your staff, because they're the weak link at that point. But what do you do in a situation where you have somebody who is perfectly capable? That maybe it's a young lawyer that's making in that 65 to 80 range. So they're getting paid market rate for a person with their talent level. They're not hitting home runs. They're maybe not even hitting singles regularly, but they get the job done. They just aren't, they're a 9 to 5er,
Well,
and
and look,
do,
that's the
do, do,
psychological, right? So look, and there's also the human component and the team component. Every time you're about to make a decision, how will this upset the apple cart you have? One of the only benefits of COVID is that has dramatically changed. If somebody's not cutting it, there's less of an interpersonal issue that you have to deal with on the other side. So let's take
that's
some
true.
positive from it, right? But that said, I think that this is the next question. Again, we have a bunch of things that we sort of could unpack here, right? One is how quickly to do something once you know it's time to do it, right? And which is sometimes easier said than done, despite what should be done. But secondly, you're talking about just upgrading. This person might not even be in the bottom 10%. Maybe they are. Maybe they're right at the 10. They're not harming you, but you need to upgrade. That to me can be the hardest piece because there's no bright line. It's like they have to be out on Friday, but to get to the next level that you want to continue to upgrade and get that team better and better. You see it with professional sports teams where a favorite player who's just not cutting it anymore gets cut. Those things happen. And so, because you have limited resources, we don't have salary caps, but we have a budget we have to work within. And so what happens when you're ready for, you say, hey, this guy's just, not getting us the offense we need. And that to me is a whole nother, but even more complicated situation. So you don't have the negative that you think there's awful stuff there, but mediocrity. Is there ever, and to me, that's one of those moments in life, because if you're in growth mode, it's sometimes very hard to remove that person. Take a paralegal. As you get multiple paralegals, the issue that you have is, well, yes, they're not your best, but that means if you're ready for growth, you need another one. And then if you get rid of somebody, that means you need two.
Yeah.
And that to me is the unwritten story of the entrepreneur in growth mode that is most challenging, and why I talked about in a previous episode of always be hiring, because if you're not fully staffed, you don't have a chance of moving up the mediocre to great. That person's stuck for the foreseeable future, because the moment somebody leaves, now you're down one. And if you want to grow, then you need another one. And if you want to get rid of mediocrity, that's three. That's never happening. So
Yeah.
mediocrity will stay.
And just the idea of saying that mediocrity will stay in your firm, just it crushes your soul, right?
Absolutely.
But I mean, this gets back to something that we talked about with John Fisher. We talked about with Kristen. We talked about the role of systems in your organization, because if you do have them documented, then it allows you to bring in somebody sort of at a moment's notice, right? If you do have to make those quick trips because you have,
Depending on the job. Look,
well, of course,
no. And the systems obviously help a hell of a lot, but it is not a panacea. There's a certain amount of information, depending. If you've gotten your job down to its strict widgets, God bless. But when you're taking over clients, knowing the predilections of those clients, turnover has cost on a bunch of different levels. So
oh yeah,
again, it depends on the position. And while, look, yes, the systems will make it easier, better, cheaper, and faster. It is not like it is painless, and the person is not a widget you can plug into that system and say, okay, go. That's the dream, but we all know that it's not a perfect handoff.
So has your firm developed a system or a practice of how to offboard a lawyer who is leaving, whether by termination or by choice? Do you have like, okay, this is the way we're going to do it? Because I'll tell you, after you answer the question, I'll tell you how our firm tends
Well,
to do
I'll
it.
let you go
Okay.
first, because we with a firm with many different practice areas, we've seen many different areas. There are two, to me, there are two different departures. There's the friendly departure, which is, somebody's moving on for whatever reason, either joint decision or their decision, or even your decision, where the person is cooperative in the departure. The real issue, the rubber, and you need a policy and procedure for that, but where it gets hairy and sticky is when somebody else has not bought in or has gone off the deep end, which we've had a couple times in our history. And the idea is, how do you protect the clients and make sure they're not hurt? How do you protect the firm? How do you then get somebody else moved into the place? I mean, those are the different areas, but love to hear your answer.
So we had an interesting situation a while back. We actually had a amicable departure. And then when we got after that departure happened and we got into the weeds on the client on the client files, we found that the lawyer had been billing them for stuff that hadn't been done. So we had to go back to the clients and say, "Hey, you got this invoice? Why don't pay it? And if you've paid us, we're issuing you a refund." We've had some terrible situations. So,
Well, because you want, like, the first thing is your relationship with the client. You want to do no
absolutely.
harm, and look, that is always the case. The piece that I would say, and this is something we look at the Max Law community. People want to hire an associate. And part of, look, obviously the ethical considerations are they need to be supervised. But as people are growing and building, very often you're doing all the other things to build your firm. And the question is, how much is your thumb on the supervision? And so whenever I look at somebody wanting to come, we have a practice group that I'd love to hire somebody, and I don't have anybody in it. And I've now, in my senior years of doing this, will let cases go by the wayside. It pains me, but I will just say, hey, we are not going to keep this practice group in place until there's a person we like, know, and trust. Whereas before, we might have taken a chance on somebody junior. The liability is so high. And
Well,
that's the piece that we're
and
not,
then you're going to wind up 3 months later, and they're not going to be working out because they weren't the right fit.
or they are, but the risk is too great. Like, you're
Yeah.
taking too much of a risk. And so, to me, again, if you pyramid correctly, it works nicely, because you're able to have people supervising, and either, like the classic large firm model: partner, junior partner, senior associate, mid-level associate, junior associate, and it pyramids up. And that's how, that makes sense. And there's supervision at every level. In the Max Law community, most of us don't have that full structure in place. And that is why, when we talked about the turnover from 1 to 3 years, you don't know, like people coming out of law school, it's a complete wild card as to what their acumen is going to be. They may have great grades in law school and can take a law school test. Common sense may go at the door. We've
I've had
and
that.
we've had a yeah.
Oh,
No, and we've had a
I've,
couple of situations where people who were, you know, closely vetted mentees of people that we know walk in the door, seem to be fine, and something happens in their life, either mental health or substance abuse or what have you, or some issue we don't know where they go from performing to not. And there's not a note. They don't send you an email and say, "Hey, I'm good. I'm jumping off the cliff today." It's one of those things that one of the reasons with our intake team that we so carefully monitor an upset client call. Every lawyer is going to get an upset client call at least once a year. Somebody's going to be upset, family member. We know that, but it's almost like I think of this when you hear about the CIA and chatter. If I hear too much chatter, you can tell the cadence of whether or not a lawyer is on game based on what you're getting back. We know that based on a particular lawyer, particular practice area, and the level of cases they're getting, what level of pushback from clients we should be getting within a standard deviation. And when you see stuff going beyond it, that's when you're like, hey, we got problems. We got to dig deeper. And the worst part is it's never better than you think.
yeah, I mean, that's really the big takeaway that I think people should hear is that there's always many more problems than are visible at first glance. And so, really, what it comes down to then, Seth, is you know is it merely trust your gut? I mean, you've built this business, your instincts. Is it something where you have to say, I'm the kind of person who gives, three strikes before you're out? What I mean, obviously there's going to be certain situations, maybe drug use, sex stuff, that type of thing. There, it's one strike and you're gone, right? Because you can't put your clients at risk of somebody who is taking those types of chances. But are there other things that you can sort of let slide because it's not that big? I mean, where do you draw the line?
I mean, look, and the answer is on so many levels. I wish that I could hand you a playbook and say, I could tell you from my
It's
experiences, the ones that you don't come back from, and the ones generally is anything dealing with, a lack of trust on client funds or anything like that. That's a third rail. It's your bar license. You're obviously not going anywhere near it. But the question is, there are lots of life situations, people that have had, have done stupid things either inside the firm or outside the firm. And, there's where do you draw the line? Could be an entire show unto itself. I think what we're
well,
talking about today is like once you know what you want to do, how do you do it? We try to, and again, we'll hear more on Thursday, but best practices, we try to do Fridays where it's not upsetting the apple cart. We try to get as much in place as possible. We're sophisticated with systems, thanks to Jay, of making sure emails are shut down and fobs are shut down and things like that. But there's a whole world of what do you do in that gray matter before knowing that there's a definitive resolution as to what you want to do.
so let me ask you this then. Okay, so you do Friday afternoons. That tends to be your that is your policy. I've also heard, and I've done it Monday mornings. And I've done it Monday mornings because you don't want to give them something to stew about all weekend. You want them to be able to go back to wherever it is that they came from, go home, and perhaps they're home alone. Everybody else is at work. They can sort of collect themselves, that type of thing. But then you
Yeah,
deal with the,
and we've done that. We
yeah,
look, we've mixed it up. Like it based on the situation. You take your best thing. The problem with Monday mornings, and we've done it successfully, we've done it unsuccessfully, is everybody's there. And if somebody
well,
wants to
that's
make
the
a
next,
scene, it's Monday morning. It sets the tone for the week. So I
ex-
don't disagree that depending on the situation, if somebody's like, "Hey, go file for unemployment. You'll make more now than before, and you can do stuff." I get that logic. I just found over time we picked something, and it's funny. So I mentioned before I had a really bad situation a few weeks ago, and I got on the phone with a few mentors in the space, the significant others of good friends of mine who are in charge of HR at multi-hundred or thousand person operations. And one woman had said she had just let 50 people go that day, including somebody who was at a funeral. They had to do it by Skype and they had to do it that day. Awful, awful stuff. So I think, look, the number one thing is don't lose your humanity with it and figuring out what has the least opportunity for fuel to the fire. I don't disagree that it's great if somebody has somewhere to go and they're, but if you're in, so maybe now with COVID, it's better because they can't create a stink. But we've had situations where do you really want somebody walking to their desk on Monday morning and setting the tone for the week as they get their box and they're carrying it out? I don't buy it. But look, there's a lot of times where there is no good answer. Which one do you want to go with?
Yeah, it's funny. I was talking to one of my mentors earlier today, and we were talking about having to let somebody go. He actually had called me just after he had let somebody go. And he had let a secretary that had been with them, but he's like, I have no work for her. He has no digital marketing, has no desire to do it. The man prints out his emails, hand writes on them a response, and would give them to a staff member to respond to them. I mean, that's how antiquated this guy is. And he's like, I have no more work, I can't afford to keep her around for months at a time. He's like, but what do you do in this situation when you have somebody who
Well,
you've been working with for
okay.
years? And I said, look, my way when it comes down to firing somebody, I call them into my office. I have a witness present so that in the way
Which is very important for everybody listening. Always witness present.
always have a witness present. Have them sit down, and on the corner of my desk, basically in the eye line of the person who I need to fire, is a picture of my wife and kids. And it steals me. And I hate to say this, but I look at the person, I look at my wife and kids, and I say, I'm making this decision for the betterment of the people in that picture. And today's your last day of work here. And thank you so much for your time, but it's time for us to part ways and for us to move on in different directions.
See,
Uh,
and I'll do some stuff that I'm sure I got yelled at on Thursday for. But to me, if this is not somebody who's done wrong by us, let's say it's an upgrade situation, let's say it's a no work situation. My personal feeling is it's not like to me, it's not, yes, that's one way of thinking of it. But what I want to do is I want to make it as positive an experience as possible. It's like any breakup. Like again, most of what we talk about on our show could go back to dating. So can I do something where, hey, get your unemployment? I don't want to hurt you. If I can help you get another job, I'm going to do that. I'll open up my Rolodex. Again, it's assuming it's not a bad situation. It's just not right for us for whatever reason. If there's a way that I can make that person, again, this is something I could do when I was smaller. It's harder to do now. I'm a big fan of letting somebody stay on as a consultant. They might not make any money, but the resume can stay intact. So they're looking for a job with a job.
oh,
I don't
so tell
want
me
to.
how you do that. That's
Well,
interesting.
again,
I've never heard
okay.
that.
I'm
So
going off the
this is
grid
new.
here. This is, I again, what I'm saying is this is something, particularly when we were smaller and it was just me, right? As you get bigger, it's harder to accomplish this. But again, I would like to be able, assuming you're not messing with their unemployment. Part of the problem about getting a job is if they're like have to explain their firing from your place.
Okay.
Again, this can backfire, but when it happens, it's beautiful in the sense that you say to somebody, "Hey, it's time to get another. It's your last." Almost like the outsourcing. There's outplacement.
Right.
If somebody could be, somehow continue with a consultancy with you that's not your day to day work, it may or may not be paid may end up being the severance that they're going to be getting, but something that allows them to keep it on their resume legitimately so that because look, for you, if they get another job, it's off your unemployment,
Right.
right? They're happy. They don't hate upon you. Anything I can do that makes them happy, like in a breakup, again, using the dating analogy, you're really bitter if somebody breaks up with you. By the time you're dating somebody else, you're a lot less bitter about it, right? And so it may not be, maybe you may still be, but you're a lot less than you were the day that somebody's saying, I am breaking up with you, to quote the Seinfeld line.
Yeah. I like that. I like that. So now let me ask you another question. When it is when you're going from mediocre to better, where it's an upgrade situation, do you have a practice of giving a severance? Because in my experience, most of the people I've let go for malfeasance, and so I'm just like, I'm not giving you anything. You screwed this up. Go collect
You
unemployment. That's
say
that.
that, and I would say, severance could be a very powerful thing to make sure that you leave. It's the parting gift. Some might call it the Jeter gift basket.
Yes.
Nobody speaks ill of Jeter. They have a nice basket of signed baseballs. With that, I would argue that ironically, it is very often the person that you're getting rid of for bad stuff, that money is what buys, money solves a lot of problems, I always say. And that, again, they wronged you, they this, they that. You want to eliminate a problem. And there are times when you suck it up, and even though you have no desire to do it and it's not the right thing to do, that you want to buy peace. And there are times when a few dollars will buy peace. Again, if a week or two of salary buys peace in a situation where, person's going out and is flaming down, and you can prevent them from hating on you for X period of time, it's not always the craziest thing. Again, case by case, your personality may not allow you to do it. But I have seen that strategically placed severance can be very valuable, especially even when you are fully in the right, in the sense that it's just one less, if for me, if I can get a release signed, and we're talking probably more bluntly than we should on this show. This may be one of these shows that has a short shelf life and will not live on. I truly believe that when the release is signed, that is worth something to you, even when the person was the person doing bad stuff. Gotcha. So, to me, and again, I think we should talk to Dan about that.
I think, it's a really interesting time, and especially Corona, COVID, whatever you want to call it, sort of upended the way. I mean, I think with people being more remote, it becomes easier to terminate somebody. I mean, you just cut off all their access to stuff, especially if everything's in the cloud, and nobody's there to see them walk out with their tail between their legs. But it also, can impact you. And honestly, for a lot of people who are listeners, it may not necessarily be, an upgrade situation. It may be, well, I don't need that body anymore. Let me give you an example. I had for years, a staffer whose job it was basically to call our Connecticut DMV. And her job was basically to get into the office at 8:45 a.m., dial up, and be on hold. And it wasn't unusual for her to be on hold for 3 or 4 hours a day to be able to get through to somebody to ask the questions we needed answered. And about a year before we let her go, for other reasons, there was a change, and now you could email. Right. So now she wasn't on, and I didn't know this.
Right, but that's you didn't know that she was doing it for a year.
For a year, she would basically come into the office, send her morning emails, get the answers by 9:10, and her first 5 hours of the day, work was done. We weren't assigning her extra work. She was basically working a full-time gig for a part-time job, for a full-time salary. And I didn't know this because I wasn't involved in that process anymore.
By the way, a topic for another show will be, how do you deal personally when you find out shit? I had one of these moments today where something is going on that is, you sit, you profess, we talk about it on the show, and you find out your own firm isn't doing it. That to me is like, yeah,
it happened today.
Let's save it for another, because I just had one of these moments today. I literally go and speak nationally on a stage about something, and I found out that we're not following that practice in our firm, and I'm just like, a business practice. I'm just like, your head wants to explode.
My head exploded at about 11:37 this morning when I was looking for something and I couldn't find it in our systems. Now, it turned out to be there, categorized improperly. But I was like, can you believe we don't have it? I'm screaming at my partners. We had people, and we wound up finding what we needed. I went back in, changed the category, problem solved. But yeah, that's just crazy. But we've talked a lot about firing today, and maybe there's a good reason for it, But I think what we should do now is take a quick break. Let's bring in Ryan. He'll do his book review, and then when we come back, we'll wrap up the show. Get ready for Thursday. We've got Dan Schwartz coming. We can talk a little bit about him, and that sounds like a good plan to me. What's it sound to you?
Sounds great. Look that. Let's do it.
All right, so we'll be right back, folks. We'll hear a couple of words from our sponsors, and then we'll be back up to wrap up the show after Ryan's segment. We'll see you soon.
In this world today, if you want to grow your business, you want to grow your firm, you want to take on more cases and make a bigger impact, you have to have a digital blueprint. Statistically, throughout the time that we've been working with Blue Shark Digital, our law firm, the Atlanta Divorce Law Group, grew over 1,400%. They truly understand where we're headed and how we want to get there. I have a team in Blue Shark Digital that I feel like has my back.
Hi, it's Ryan McKeen here with this week's episode of Just Book It. And I'm going to talk to you today about Grant Cardone's 10X. And this is an interesting one because it is the last book that I read on a plane, which was coming back from a flight back from Washington, D.C. to Hartford. And this was in February of this year. And one of the things Cardone talks about in this book is really set in 2008, right before and he talks a lot about right before the financial crisis hits, what happens when the financial crisis hits, and what he does to really build his business during the financial crisis. And as I'm flying back, this is right at the end of February, so COVID is kind of a thing where it's on the radar of folks. But that weekend my wife and I had spent some time in DC. We'd had lunch at a restaurant right near Price Benowitz. We had gone to the African American History Museum and been in crowds. So it's really sort of the last normal weekend of my life in 2020. And this book is pretty good. Cardone's basic thing is, 10x. So if you want to accomplish something, you take massive action. That is the point of the book that gets drilled home over and over and over. And, his basic point in the book is, look, if you want to go to the gym twice a week for 30 minutes, what you're going to get is sore. If you want to go to the gym 7 days a week and you're there for 2 to 3 hours and you're lifting appropriately, you're lifting right, and you're eating appropriately, you're going to get ripped. So his thing is don't waste your time doing the gym 2 days a week for a half hour. If you're going to commit to something, commit to massive action that actually moves the difference. And he repeats this throughout his book. And one of the things he also repeats is, during this financial crisis, it was a time for growth, and it was a time of tremendous opportunity for him and for his businesses, which, helped shape me coming into what we've experienced in 2020 with the economy and COVID. But there are really two specific points that Cardone makes in this book that I think are lessons I take to heart and lessons I love to share with you. And the first is that, Cardone argues that the greatest threat to any small business is obscurity. And I think he's right on that. A lot of places make great pizza, but in your state, in your city, there are famous places that make pizza, and that notoriety is really what allows their business to thrive versus a competitor who makes equally as good of a pizza but is unknown within the marketplace. So as you think of threats to your business, we tend to think of, cash flow. We can think of taxes. We can think of employee retention. We can think of generating leads. But really, obscurity is your threat. So making your business or your career less obscure and taking those actions over and over actually increases your safety. And I know for me and for a lot of folks out there, putting yourself out there can be enormously uncomfortable, and it's why people don't do it or don't like to do it. And that's understandable, but that's an opportunity that if you're willing to push through and become, not famous in the sense of, Taylor Swift, but really niche famous within your market for what it is that you do, you're going to get more safety for your business. So as you think of your marketing, as you think of what it is you do with your day, think about attacking your obscurity problem, because most of us have it. So less obscurity equals more security. The second point is that Cardone makes is that anxiety feeds on time. So we all have that thing that we don't want to do, that thing that is uncomfortable, the bad news that we have to deliver. And Cardone talks specifically about, eliminating the time between you thinking like, okay, this is bad. I have to tell the client the case isn't going as well as we had hoped, or I have to tell an employee that they're no longer on our team bus. The shorter the distance between you thinking that and you actually taking action on that, the better it is, because you are going to waste a tremendous amount of anxiety if that gap is long. If you think, oh my gosh, something is wrong here, I have to tell this person, and you ruminate it about for days or weeks or months even. So shortening that gap is going to give you more energy to allow you to take the massive action that you need in your business. So I hope you got something out of this. Can't wait to stop by again next week. Thank you.
Hey there, another great book review by Ryan. I'm telling you, it's saving me hours and hours on my commute. Now that I'm so into the Peloton, I'm taking all of my spare time on the Peloton. I'm not able to listen to Audible as much as Ryan is able to do that. So getting these book reviews is really helping me, and I'd like to thank him for that. For both of us.
And I can't wait till we get the hour of Ryan, where we get the full hour block, where we get to sort of jab through these as a review.
Yeah, so folks, that's what we're talking about. One of the cool things about what we do here at Maximum Lawyer Media is that we try to put together packages for you. And so one of the things that Seth suggested, and we're in the process of putting together, is taking a whole bunch of Ryan's book reviews and packaging them as a standalone episode of our podcast. So you can hear 5 or 10 books in a row, get all those great takeaways and use them. One of the I
got an idea. Let's have people vote on their favorites and then put like a top 10 together once we got a critical mass for that.
I love it. So if there's a book that you want to see Ryan review, or if you like one of the reviews that he's done, let us know down below. Give us a comment so that way we have it and we can make sure that your favorite gets into that episode. Now, if you want to listen to us, you can always find us on the Maximum Lawyer podcast. They syndicate our show on that podcast, as well as on our own standalone podcast, available through all the major podcasting platforms, on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, on Google Podcasts. It's out there. All you got to do is search up and find us. But Seth, we have a great show coming up on Thursday. Let's talk about our guest, because I think our guest isn't part of this, entrepreneurial lawyer community.
He's on the other side of the aisle.
Exactly. And I think that's why he's going to bring some cool stuff to the mix. So tell us about our guest.
This is one of my favorite people, Dan Schwartz. So, a University of Pennsylvania fellow alum. He was on the Daily Pennsylvania, the newspaper, when I was there. He is a wicked smart writer. He has one of the best, if not the best, lawyer blogs in the country, in my opinion, the Connecticut Employment Lawyer blog. And he basically built an entire practice. Now, he is not on the consumer side. He is not a plaintiff's lawyer. He is a defense lawyer. He is the person that we reach out to when we have trouble. And he is one of those guys, special guy. The blog is amazing. So that in and of itself could be a show discussing how he built a B2B practice off a blog where he combined, sports, pop culture, family, and employment law. Wrapped it all together to have this juggernaut.
It's like the Bill Simmons. It's like the Bill Simmons of legal blogs.
Absolutely. So he was early. He is great at it, and he built a full practice, which is now nationally renowned. But the reason it's important to have him on the show, besides being a great guy, and he could talk about blogging if that was what we wanted to talk about. But what for me, when you start out, employment, it's sort of like HR. It's a cost center. Employment lawyers, I didn't know any. I didn't know anything about it. You just, you knew basic stuff. You made sure you paid time and a half, for overtime. You did all the things that you were told to do, and hopefully you have some good, people behind you. But over time, shit happens. And I believe it was coming back from the first Max LawCon. We had somebody melt down in an epic way with a late night drunken rant. And I'm sitting in the boarding area of a Southwest flight out of St. Louis, scared out of my mind about what's unfolding back at the ranch. And Friday night, of course, and was able to get Dan on the phone, who walked me off the ledge. And not only has he been a great sort of, great mindset mentor for me as far as how to think about this stuff. He's primarily Connecticut, New York, but it forced me to sort of say, hey, I need a guy on retainer so that when stuff happens, it's there, because you don't know when it happens. It happens quickly, and you don't want to be scrambling. But to me, what he has done and the thought leadership he's given and the perspective, because very often, as we talked about earlier in the show, there are no good answers, and you're trying to minimize liability while at the same time making sure that poison doesn't stay within your firm. So, again, we'll talk about this on Thursday, but we were saying before, fire fast. Well, very often when you speak to your employment lawyer, and this is what I want to push them on, you need to document a case if you don't want to get sued. So
Right.
you have a choice between pushing something out the door on the one hand and leaving yourself open to liability on the other. And it's a fascinating mix. And what I love about Dan and why he's so special is he gets it from both sides. He understands the economics and the business side as well as the legal side. And that's what you want in an advocate or practitioner, is somebody who's going to be able to say, hey, this is what the book says. This is the law. These are your risks. This is, given the facts that are here, this is what I recommend, but it's your decision.
Yeah. Yeah, I've had a couple of situations and a couple of blog posts that I've referred to of his when I've been confronting a situation, and I've gone so far as to reach out to him directly. I mean, I have some colleagues and some friends at his firm, at his former firm, at his new firm. It's not so new anymore, but I've reached out in those situations so that I could get the advice of somebody who I know knows what they're talking about.
And ironically, part of the way that I became friends with Ryan McKeen was he was good friends with Dan. And whenever we ended at a conference together, before we really knew each other very well, we would take a selfie and send it to Dan, our mutual friend. And to this day, that's part of the reason that I feel that I became as close as I did with Ryan, was we had this common bond of legal excellence out there. So I smile that it brought Ryan into my life.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Okay. So with that, we're going to end the show today. We've got a great show for you on Thursday, as Seth just said. My name is Jay Ruane, CEO of FirmFlex, social media marketing for lawyers. He is Seth Price, Blue Shark Digital, trying to help lawyers with their digital marketing and their SEO. Of course, Ruane Attorneys, Price Benowitz. But honestly, how much law are you practicing now, Seth? Not
You know
much.
what? It's funny. You say that, and yet we're onboarding. We're opening an entire new division in South Carolina, which I couldn't be more excited about. Dane Phillips, who came to us through Max LawCon, could be a whole other episode. We're going to have an incredible juggernaut now in South Carolina. So, well, I'm certainly not carrying a file into the courtroom. I spend my days trying to put these systems in place so that we can continue to grow and expand.
Yeah, that's awesome. This week I actually got to be a lawyer. I got a pardon granted yesterday for a client, and sometimes being a lawyer, getting back, getting those reps, it still feels good. Still feels good. I don't mind doing it. So I'm not totally 100% out yet. But I don't know if being 100% out is the holy grail for me. I'm still trying to figure out what I want to be when I grow up. So with that, we'll see you on Thursday, folks. Have a wonderful, wonderful day. I guess stick by CNN, MSNBC, whatever it is that you get your news, Fox News, and wait for your results. And in the meantime, go back in our catalog. If you got nothing else to do, you can listen to some old episodes. But be tuning in on Thursday for that edition of Maximum Growth Live with Dan Schwartz. But for now, bye for now. Have a great one. Take it easy.